Additional Language, or EAL, consultants for this year. We have Kimberly Goosen, whose focus is the K-3 division, Dina Alexander, grades 4 to 6. Kim Grunding is covering for a leave right now for Carrie Toussaint. Her focus is the 10 to 12. My name is Rebecca Hartwick. I'm 7 to 9. We have Stacy Itterman, 4 to 6, and Aurelia Aiello, who is our consultant for our ELD programming. Also on the screen here, you'll see Sonia Stapleton, who is our supervisor for St. John's Center for Arts and Culture, and Holly Sheely, who's the director of St. John's Center for Arts and Culture. Gathering here today, we are learning and growing our knowledge of how to best support the success of students as we reflect on our assessment practices. You can see here is our district priorities, and our student success section is highlighted in yellow. Also, this is part of our TQS, demonstrating a professional body of knowledge. You can see here as well, some of the bolded sections are what we will be focusing on today, including incorporating a range of instructional strategies according to the learning needs of our students, supporting all of our students, and we're going to be considering student variables, including prior knowledge and learning, cultural and linguistic backgrounds, and second language learning. We're also focusing on understanding of students' background, prior knowledge, and experiences. Tan Hyun says this best, is that content is the inhale and language is the exhale. Both are linked so closely together. Just before we dig a little deeper, wanted to remind you of the program of studies and the EAL benchmark criteria. For the program of studies, we have content objectives. That is, what are they learning? What are they knowing and doing? And then our language objectives are reflected on our K to 12 EAL benchmarks, and they are based on second or additional language acquisition, achievement based on multiple year trajectory, and achievement is indicated by their current English language proficiency level. And on our benchmarks, we're looking about how they will show what they are learning through reading, listening, speaking, and writing. Moving forward to the purpose of the ESL benchmarks. Our benchmarks' most important task is to guide appropriate programming for our English as an additional language learners. It sets a focus for our instruction and assessment, and it assists in communicating language growth and progress with students and parents. It also supports the transition of EAL students, possibly from grade to grade or from division to division. It also fulfills Alberta education requirements for funding and teacher accountability as outlined in the Alberta Education Funding Manual and Guide to Education. So we'll begin with planning for assessment. On the screen you're looking at the cycle of assessment and instruction. You will notice that this cycle does not end. It starts with knowing your learners and creating clear learning targets. These learning targets include both content objectives taken from the program of studies and language outcomes taken from the benchmarks. Using a backwards design, consider your students and what would you like them to be able to do by the end of your unit, but also how they will demonstrate this learning. Knowing your students' EAL level will also tell you about the level of support an EAL student at that level will need in order to show their learning. We then provide input that is comprehensible to all EAL learners, exposing students to different types of activities where we can provide formative feedback using that formative feedback to propel a student's learning forward. Feedback will include explicitly communicating to a student how they can improve, and this will inform your programming and instruction as well. We then continue to provide intentional scaffolding and feedback to keep that learning moving forward. Our TQS acknowledges that even before we start teaching a unit, it's important that clear targets are identified. Teachers should know what should be explicitly taught. Students will know whether they have been successful in their learning because they have received effective feedback and direction, and assessments are intentional and authentic because they have been determined at the planning phase of their unit. Using this backwards design unit plan, we start with the outcome in mind, but we also know what the assessment will look like to allow students to show what they know, and the resources and activities that will support access to the language being used in the content. So, differentiating your assessment. For some of our students who may have limited English, it's important that we're differentiating so that they can show their learning. First, it's important to note that we can't always rely on written output. This might be something that's very difficult for a student, especially if they are new to learning the alphabet that we use, if they have previously been taught in an alphabet different than the ABCs. Also, start with diagnostic assessments to determine what students already know and what their learning goals are. So possibly something as simple as a KWL chart, where students can share either by pictures or speaking or possibly writing what they already know about a subject. You can then track their progress with outcome checklists, and this will help with communication and transition meetings. It's going to be very important to use multiple means of assessment and involve the students in the process. Figure out what their strengths and weaknesses are, and we can target their strengths so that they can show best what they have learned. Some things we need to consider with our English as an additional language learners. Start by noting the student's EAL proficiency level. This will inform what is reasonable to expect from each level of an EAL learner. In some later slides, we'll be sharing a chart with this laid out for you. Consider the language function or language needed to interact with the content in the unit. Identify the key vocabulary for each level of EAL student. An EAL level 1 in your grade 8 science class will have a focus on the tier 1 or everyday words found in your science unit, whereas a level 3 EAL student will need targeted support to access the subject-specific vocabulary and will access some academic vocabulary, which is the more abstract language in your unit. Reflect on where you can support grammar or language structures in your unit. This includes when students are speaking and also in their writing. As teachers, we need to note that EAL students will have a content objective taken from the program of studies. But they will also need a language objective taken from the benchmarks. As teachers, we need to reflect on what the content objective is and what is reasonable to expect for an EAL student at each level to produce to show their learning. We can also use the benchmarks to identify a language outcome that the student is working towards and what type of supports and differentiation will need to be present in order to allow the students access to the language being used in the content. For example, in a science class in junior high, you may be working on the plants for food and fiber unit. There will be content objectives related to that. For your EAL students, there's a vocabulary section on the benchmarks. The language objective would be increasing possibly their subject-specific vocabulary related to plants for food and fiber. Looking at comprehensible input, the idea of comprehensible input means that how we choose to present information, what resources we use, and in what ways we make the language in the unit accessible has been considered. When we identify students on the benchmarks, we can reflect on presenting content to students that is challenging, but that they can understand. The idea of presenting content in their zone of proximal development, representing the space between what a learner is capable of doing unsupported and what the learner cannot do, even with support. It is the range where the learner is able to perform, but only with support from a teacher or peer with more knowledge or expertise. We often talk about lowering the barriers, not the bar. When we allow for multiple access points to the content, it helps break down language-heavy content. As an example, when we support the content with images or by modeling an exemplar, displaying content in graphic organizers, showing video clips, providing sentence frames that provide an exemplar of sentence structure, we are making that learning visible. We can also use access students' prior knowledge to help link new information with previous learning. This is a great place to encourage students to use their home language in order to link past and new learning. We can also consider appropriate verbal input. Reflect on your rate of speech and tone. Remember to slow down. Take time to pause. Support new vocabulary with synonyms and articulate your speech. Also think about all those nonverbal cues that students are picking up on. Use them to your advantage. Don't forget about the potential of gestures, body language, and facial expressions. In preparation for this presentation, I made a note to myself to focus on ensuring that my speech was slow throughout this presentation as an example of some things that we could be thinking about with our students when we're teaching in the classroom. Input is made comprehensible when there are clear explanations of tasks. Speak to your expectations, model and talk through an exemplar. The I do, we do, you do is an excellent strategy. Use peer support, home language groupings, and group collaboration will help support these students. As well, students can be taught to use translation tools. Moving on to comprehensible output. So this is what the students are producing after receiving the input. That's the part that you are giving to the students. So linked with providing comprehensible output, it will directly relate to the types of comprehensible output you will expect from your students. As this quote from Haynes communicates, forcing an English learner to communicate in ways that are beyond their current language capabilities often frustrates them and creates an emotional distance between them and school, further widening the education gap. After English language learners understand the instructions, offering differentiated tasks will allow them to communicate their understanding in alternative forms and in ways that honor their current language development. This is a tool that many teachers have found useful. Here we're looking at what is reasonable expect from each level of EAL student. It's a comprehensible output sheet. It details, again, what's reasonable to expect. You only need one copy per class, and you will write the names of all the EAL level 1s, under level 1s, 2s under level 2, and so on. This unit planner not only reminds us of reasonable expectations for an EAL student, but it also visually reminds us that we must start each unit by activating our students' prior knowledge, and we can record that activity in the space at the top of the sheet to list activities that will do this. The planner also lets us record the different types of vocabulary that each unit contains. Your EAL Level 1 students will be able to successfully interact with those Tier 1 everyday words of the unit. Level 2 students will build upon those everyday words. interacting with more subject-specific vocabulary, which are Tier 3 words. With support, ELL Level 3 students require targeted differentiation supports to interact with more subject-specific vocabulary and beginning to use and understand Tier 2 academic vocabulary. Academic vocabulary includes those more abstract words and directing verbs that are only really experienced in school. For example, analyze, conclude, and justify. ELL Levels 4 students are being supported with interacting with more academic vocabulary, Tier 2 words, with targeted supports, and Level 5s are interacting with all the vocabulary with limited supports. And one of my colleagues is going to put a link in the chat that will take you to these comprehensible output pages. And here, just a reminder of the level of support needed to access language. Each divisional benchmark also lists the level of support needed. Each EAL level requires support. You will see this level of support in red. Level 1 and 2 EAL students require intensive support. EAL Level 3 and 4 require targeted support, and EAL Level 5s are interacting with the language in the content with limited support. And so, student output must reflect the comprehensible input we have provided. Students will need multiple exposures to the types of assessment we will ask of them. For example, if you're using a Freyer model as a piece of summative assessment, make sure students have had multiple experiences with a Freyer model, followed by constructive feedback. In this way, students will know what the expectation is of them on the piece of summative assessment. Here you can see some examples of ways you could differentiate the output that you are asking a student to complete. Sentence frames can and should be provided to support written and verbal output. This allows access into the writing assessment or verbal communication of an assignment, lessening, but also supporting the language load. Sentence frames can be provided along with a word bank of words the student has had exposure to over the unit. You can see the example here is some academic vocabulary in a math class. Some of those words would be possibly obscure and would maybe need some explanation, and that would help support the student in accessing. Graphic organizers are a great way to assess content. There are a variety of graphic organizers that can be used. Graphic organizers make processes visible, supporting the organization of concepts. They are versatile in that graphic organizers can be used across content areas, lessening the language load for students. Graphic organizers also allow for critical thinking without having to use high levels of language. Instead of a report or a multiple choice test, graphic organizers are a great way to formatively give feedback to students and can also be used as a summative piece of assessment. They can support students in organizing ideas shared through discussion, planning, or writing tasks, or actually be the writing task, or used when recording information from the text. So I spoke about a Freyer model previously. You can see an example of a Freyer model here, where wetlands is in the center, living, non-living, definition, and then a drawing of what wetlands are. One type of assessment will definitely not fit all of the students in your classroom. Consider performance tasks, interviews, oral presentations, self-reflections, or tasks that can be collected throughout the unit and organized in a student's portfolio, which will highlight their growth. When reflecting on how you are scaffolding how information is being presented in the input of information, remember again that these same scaffolds of differentiation strategies must be also provided in how students show us what they know about the content. Beginning a lesson or unit by activating a student's prior knowledge will help students link new information with previous information. As teachers, we can use this time to listen to the language students are using, and we can use this formative information to front-load vocabulary that students may be missing, that is needed in order for them to effectively interact with the new content. Making learning visible with the use of visuals through video clips, images, sentence frames, graphic organizers, and providing word banks are some of the ways we can do this. We also can support the academic vocabulary through adding synonyms to allow access to the vocabulary at a level that is comprehensible to students. Also, providing time for students to talk about their learning through a lesson is key. Students should be participating in structured talk about their learning 70% of the class time. Just thinking about that, it means we should only be taking about 30% of a class, and students should be given opportunities through structured talk time to discuss their learning. The EAL team has many structured activities that elicit student talk about their learning. It can be as simple as during a math lesson, asking students to turn to the person beside them and ask them to tell that person what the first step in solving the equation is. This can be supported by writing a quick sentence frame like, "First I would," and then bring them right back to the lesson to continue. So how do we put this all together? Dina is now going to show you what this would look like in activities centered around the topic of multiculturalism.
Thanks, Rebecca. Hello, everyone. Rebecca has shared multiple ways of how we can scaffold the input and the output for our students. So now, as she said, we want to put this all together for you. What would this look like if, for example, you're doing a lesson on multiculturalism? So this example will go through teaching a lesson about multiculturalism and how you're going to scaffold the language within that lesson. A place to start would be activating students' prior knowledge and building that background vocabulary. Some ways to do this could be watching a video. Make sure you can turn on subtitles, could be changed to home language. In fact, if you're using a Google Classroom or if you're using D2L, I would highly recommend even posting that video in advance on your platform, teaching the students on how to change subtitles to home language, and maybe they can watch it before the lesson in order to build on that background knowledge. There's also ReadWorks. You can introduce your EALs or the whole class to ReadWorks. It is a free website and it is American. It contains leveled passages to increase academic vocabulary, build reading stamina, and it will also build that background knowledge. Um, these can be nonfiction passages, and they are age appropriate. So for instance, just noting, as I said, it's an American site, so it is leveled about 2 years higher. So for instance, if you assign a kindergarten level passage, it is probably equivalent to about a grade 2 passage. If you go on EPD, there's a couple of documents to show you how you can access ReadWorks. In this case, you can then look at breaking down the larger word into smaller parts. Instruction on multisyllabic word reading or teaching students to read words with more than one syllable is a crucial bridge between your basic phonics and fluent word reading. Students could complete what they already know about smaller words, and then they could share with a partner and eventually with the whole class, and discussion can occur. An example could be that a synonym for multi is many. Visuals could be added to a chart like this, and this strategy supports in building on literacy foundation and developing your students' vocabulary. You could also add home language to this. To encourage some talk time regarding this topic, so Rebecca did mention that ideally we need to increase our student talk time and reduce our personal teacher talk time. And so you could do an activity, slide the line. If you're not familiar with slide the line, it's basically posing a question or an idea and then having students stand upon that line, whether they strongly agree or they strongly disagree. So slide the line strategy allows students to practice their response in a safe but in a structured way as well. To scaffold the language, try using sentence starters and stems. Don't forget that sentence starters are excellent for both the written and the oral output. This is an excellent way of promoting students to discuss the content with more complex structures and thinking. So we're structuring our talk time, focusing it on the content area that you are teaching. To continue providing practice and exposure to this topic, students could complete a task such as a graphic organizer, like a FRAIR model that we spoke about earlier. Students could write the definition in their own words if they are able to. They could also write it in home language. A simple definition could be provided. If you're needing help with simplifying terms, AI can be helpful for this. You can type in, please provide a definition of multiculturalism in simple terms. So I did that, and it provided me with multiculturalism means that people from different backgrounds, cultures, and countries live together in the same place. It's like having friends who speak different languages, eat different foods, and celebrate different holidays, but everyone gets along and respects each other. And so you can tell AI for what age level and reading level that you would like it to simplify it to. Students can also draw their own picture or be provided one, and then they could label the image as well. Examples and non-examples can be shared with a partner and then with the whole class as well. So what is multiculturalism and what isn't multiculturalism? Or if depending on the age of your students, you may choose to have students write a sentence about multiculturalism instead of a non-example. Here's an example of a variety of strategies to build background knowledge through the use of multiple texts, videos, and visuals. If you look on the left side, this is a reading where you can use a translate tool and translate content into a student's home language. As well, the YouTube video has Spanish subtitles used. Therefore, the student can listen in English and then use Spanish subtitles to check for understanding. You can also add a piece of text into an AI like ChatGPT and ask for the text to be adapted into a lesser reading comprehension level or to add English language learner supports. You can even ask it to be created into an infographic. The benefit of an infographic is that it has less language for the students to have to try to understand and make sense of. You can use Immersive Reader through the Microsoft Lens app. The app is accessible on your phone, tablet, and any device that supports Microsoft. A piece of text is scanned and then opened in Immersive Reader where the text can be translated into many languages, including Tigrinya. You can then access any of the supporting features Immersive Reader provides, including audio. This is a great resource for students, parents, and teachers. And so sometimes our textbooks are available in a PDF or on Google Classrooms, and you can turn on Immersive Reader. It will help the student read using that app to read what the text is saying. Google Read and Write also provides these capabilities as well. So that's another place you can access. Writing the top 5 gems for the reading, so the top 5 important points you've learned about multiculturalism. This is another way to incorporate talk time. A think, write, pair, share strategy can be used. You pose the question, you allow students to think about their answer, and that longer time to process is crucial for our students who are learning an additional language. Then write their ideas down. They could share it with a partner and then share it with another partner or in a larger group. Here again, you can provide some sentence frames for them to use it. And maybe level ones and some of your level twos, they might be reluctant to engage in an activity of this nature. And that's okay because they're listening. They're listening to the conversation and they're picking up on that vocabulary. So giving them the time and the opportunity to listen is also beneficial. And so, as I said, here is the assignment that the students will be working on now that they have access to information on multiculturalism. So what supports can be provided for your EAL students moving forward? Students could complete the response in a variety of forms. It is important that any form you are expecting students to complete the assessment in should have been taught explicitly prior to the assessment. So if you're providing them with a graphic organizer as a form of assessment, please ensure that the graphic organizer has been used previously during the lessons for them to have the practice and the knowledge to know how to share information on that graphic organizer. Some examples could be paragraphs, graphic organizers, infograph, recorded oral interviews, and still frame movies. Here, sentence frame is an example that sentence frames could be used for the students' written output. So example of multiculturalism is because, multiculturalism means, multiculturalism is important because. And so what you're doing is you're inviting them and sharing their ideas, and you're scaffolding the language for them, where they're just having maybe to input upon that line or that sentence frame a couple of their thoughts. So here, other language supports would be to provide synonyms next to the academic language. So for example, the media can influence, where another simpler term, a synonym for influence, is control, how we see an issue because. And so by doing this strategy, this is not just beneficial to your EAL students, this is great strategy to use for all your learners in your classroom, because that academic vocabulary can be an obstacle for some of our students, that they cannot, if they don't understand what the word means, then they're not able to access the other information in the question. So reporters can use the media to promote. A synonym would be to share. So consider using synonyms when looking at some of your handouts, your textbooks. And then the next slide will show you how you can take a resource that you may have used for multiple lessons or for the last couple of years, and it's a PDF. You can use I Love PDF to convert it into a document that can be edited. Once you do that conversion, the opportunities are endless. You can add those synonyms. You can add some visuals. You can add some sentence frames and embed some graphic organizers into that handout that you've been using for the last 5, 6 years. And so these tools are beneficial in scaffolding whatever needs our students have, especially our English language learners, and scaffolding the language for them. EdTech has shared this with us, and it's appropriate to share with your team in your buildings as well. Word banks can help students feel comfortable using new words. Sometimes even having the correct spelling available to them will help them use the new vocabulary. Content word walls is a great way to make sure that our classrooms display the academic vocabulary and students are accessing this regularly as modeled by the teacher. And so we're no longer looking for those Pinterest beautiful word walls. Our word walls should be versatile. Our word walls need to be interactive, and it doesn't have to be a full bulletin board word wall. You can use alpha boxes. These alpha boxes are available in a large poster format, or they are available on EPD in an 8.5 by 11, where students can put them in their binders or in their duotangs, and they could be a way of collecting vocabulary about a certain topic. And for this instance, it was multiculturalism. So terms like mosaic, ethnic, food, peace, diversity. You can add also visuals, and you can add home language. Instead of writing a paragraph or an essay, a level 1 EAL student can create a visual response, like seen on this example here. You can then provide sentence frames for students to talk or write about what they know. Students can also write in their home language, or they can use Google Read and Write as well. And so it doesn't, as we said before, have to be an essay or a report or a multiple choice assessment. Using a collage of visual and the student having to tell you about this collage will let you know exactly what they know about that concept or that term or that idea that you've taught about. And so that way you can provide that feedback to them when necessary about their understanding of that topic. Understanding deeply what multilingual learners experience, what assets and strength they bring to our schools, and what they need to thrive will shift classroom practices for all students. So the need of your students are what guides all of our programs that we offer. Using strategies like those we have shared are essential for engaging EALs in learning opportunities that promote language acquisition and ways to access the content. However, these same strategies provide all learners with supports. Good instruction practices support all learners. The majority of the tools we have shared today are UDL strategies that you are already utilizing in your classrooms with all your students. But for our EAL students, you are scaffolding the language so that they can access the content and they can engage in your lessons. Feedback. Feedback is an essential element in the culturally responsive teacher's arsenal. Too often, culturally and linguistically diverse students who struggle have developed a set of learning moves that aren't effective, and they are not sure what's going wrong or what to do about it. So using technology to have students hear that descriptive feedback, making sure that providing meaningful, formative feedback. Feedback can be provided in D2L. Feedback can be provided in a conversation one-on-one with our students. The expectation for level ones and twos who are receiving no marks, that feedback can be recorded in D2L. It is essential that our all stakeholders, that our families are receiving feedback on how the students are doing. Just because they're level ones and twos and not receiving feedback, we still need to report to the families, to the guardians, as to how they're accessing that content and what is their understanding of that content. So constructive feedback is how we need to move forward. So what does that look like? Difference between feedback and praise, it is not advice that we're giving. Quality feedback is providing students actionable, specific information with the goal of improvement in mind. So feedback should be instructive rather than evaluative. Feedback should be specific but not overwhelming. It needs to be timely and provided in low stakes, supportive environment. So it's not pointing out everything that a student did wrong. This is especially important for your ELs, where sometimes those errors and problems can be overwhelming. We don't want to completely discourage our students. We need to figure out the best place to start for the biggest impact for all our learners. Everyone gets anxious or defensive when receiving feedback. Doesn't matter how old we are. Creating a strong classroom culture that celebrates the opportunity for feedback and reframes errors as information is so important. It's about building strong relationships, trust, and an environment built on rigor and high expectations for all. Students need to know that you believe they are capable of greatness. When they feel safe, then they will take risks. Here we have just a handful of tools that can be used in providing feedback. Padlet, you can set up a Padlet board with questions and students can add their reactions to the board. No student accounts are needed here. Lots of layout options are available. And as teachers, you can, once they've created their Padlet, you can provide feedback on there. Mote is a way of creating that oral feedback. Blocklet is a game generator. So they would create a game based on a topic, and there would be a teacher dashboard, and we would provide feedback for them. Reading Eggs, which is a lot of our Division 1 and up to grade 4, they're using it. These also, a Teacher Eggs has a teacher dashboard, and that provides feedback as well, teacher feedback. And we also have the Literacy Pro for our older kiddos in elementary. And again, there's a teacher dashboard there where you could provide feedback. And Pear Deck adds interaction and feedback options to slide deck presentations as well. So these are only a handful of options where you could provide, using technology, some feedback. But feedback, again, can be given on one-on-one conversations with our students when we're talking with them. We have a few PG opportunities coming up. November 6th, also around this time at 3:45 in the afternoon, we have evidence collection and annotating writing. And on November 13th, we have best practices for updating benchmark PGs, and we have our November ELD collaboratives. So please always check LS Weekly and join us for our upcoming PG opportunities. At this time, I am going to stop the recording. On behalf of the EAL team, we would like to thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We know how busy you are, so we really truly appreciate the time that you've shared with us to be here. Again, this session is recorded and will be shared out to schools. Thank you very much. Please feel free to unmute and put your questions in the chat.